The cruelest invitations are often wrapped in the brightest ribbons, and Emma Carter was about to learn that hope could wear the same face as humiliation. The envelope rested carefully in her hands as she stood beneath the faded porch light outside the tiny cottage she had called home since the day her former pack rejected her. The silver wax seal shimmered beneath the evening sky, bearing the crest of the Royal Moon Court. For a long moment, she simply stared, wondering if someone had delivered it to the wrong address. No one from the capital remembered women like her. No one sent invitations to a rejected Omega whose name had become little more than an uncomfortable whisper. Yet there it was, written in elegant script. Miss Emma Carter, your presence is requested at the Grand Moon Banquet. Her heart skipped in a way it had not for years. Perhaps someone had finally seen beyond the painful title that had followed her everywhere. Perhaps this invitation meant that the world was changing. Perhaps kindness still existed where she had long stopped looking for it. She stepped inside her modest home and unfolded the letter again, reading every line until she had memorized each word. There was no explanation, no reason for the invitation, only the place, the date, and the royal seal. Even so, she smiled. It was small, uncertain, almost fragile, but it was real. The following morning, she opened the old cedar chest that held the few treasures she had refused to throw away. At the very bottom lay the pale blue dress her mother had sewn years before. Time had faded its color, and one sleeve had begun to fray, but Emma spent hours repairing every loose stitch with patient hands. She polished the simple silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother and brushed her long chestnut hair until it fell neatly across her shoulders. Looking into the cracked mirror, she knew she would never resemble the glamorous daughters of powerful alpha families, but for the first time in many seasons, she allowed herself to believe she looked worthy of standing among them. The road to the capital stretched nearly 20 miles through quiet forests and rolling hills. Emma walked every step with steady determination, greeting travelers with gentle smiles even when most ignored her. Along the way, she paused to help a frightened little girl retrieve a scarf that had blown into a patch of thorn bushes. She accepted nothing in return except the child's grateful smile, which somehow warmed her more than the afternoon sun. By sunset, the towers of the Royal Moon Court appeared beyond the trees, glowing with golden light against the deepening sky. Music drifted through the cool evening air while elegant carriages lined the entrance to the magnificent hall. Noble wolves laughed together beneath crystal lanterns, their jeweled clothing sparkling as servants welcomed each honored guest by name. Emma paused at the foot of the marble staircase and gently straightened her repaired dress before taking a quiet breath. She believed she had finally reached the doorway to a better future. She could not see the amused glances exchanged across the ballroom windows. She could not hear the whispers already spreading from table to table. She did not know that long before she had arrived, nearly everyone inside had been waiting for only one thing. They had not invited Emma Carter to celebrate with them. They had invited her so they could laugh. Emma climbed the wide marble staircase with careful steps, feeling as though every polished stone beneath her shoes belonged to another world. The enormous doors stood open, revealing a ballroom brighter than anything she had ever imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen stars, filling the hall with warm golden light that reflected across polished floors and towering silver columns. Musicians played a graceful melody from the balcony, while servants moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with sparkling cider, fresh fruit, and delicate pastries. The scent of cedarwood, fresh flowers, and expensive perfume drifted through the air. For one quiet moment, Emma believed she had truly been welcomed. A young attendant approached with a pleasant smile and accepted her invitation without hesitation. "Miss Emma Carter," he announced politely before stepping aside. Several nearby conversations paused. Faces slowly turned toward her. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before polite smiles returned. Yet something inside Emma felt strangely unsettled. She could not explain why. She offered a gentle nod to those watching and continued deeper into the ballroom, hoping to find the seat prepared for her. Instead, another servant escorted her past rows of beautifully decorated tables occupied by respected alphas, influential betas, and noble families dressed in elegant fabrics that shimmered beneath the chandeliers. She continued walking farther and farther until they reached a small table tucked against the far wall beside a decorative pillar where the view of the celebration was partly blocked. "Your seat, Miss Carter," the servant said before disappearing into the crowd. Emma quietly thanked him and sat alone. From her corner, she watched the ballroom come alive. Noble daughters laughed behind jeweled fans, while young alphas exchanged confident smiles, each hoping to impress the powerful families surrounding them. Everywhere she looked, people greeted one another with familiar warmth, yet no one approached her table. Instead, curious eyes lingered a little too long before turning away with hidden amusement. The whispers began softly, almost impossible to hear. "She actually came. I did not think she would believe the invitation. Look at that old dress. Someone should have warned her." Emma lowered her eyes toward the folded napkin resting beside her plate. She had lived through whispers before. They usually faded if she ignored them. Across the ballroom, Lady Victoria Hawthorne watched Emma with a satisfied smile. As the daughter of one of the most influential alpha families, Victoria had organized much of the evening's entertainment. She leaned toward a circle of friends, speaking quietly enough that only those beside her could hear. They exchanged knowing glances before several of them looked directly toward Emma. One after another, smiles spread across their faces. Emma noticed the attention but chose to believe she was imagining the discomfort growing inside her chest. She reminded herself that kindness often required patience. Perhaps introductions would happen later. Perhaps everyone was simply busy greeting important guests. Hoping to settle her nerves, she reached for a glass of sparkling cider. Before it touched her lips, a cheerful voice echoed through the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced with a wide smile, "our first special guest has arrived exactly as planned." Laughter rippled through several tables before quickly disappearing behind carefully controlled expressions. Emma slowly lowered her glass, unaware that every pair of eyes in the ballroom had quietly settled on her. Emma remained seated as the uneasy silence settled over the ballroom like an invisible curtain. The master of ceremonies stood at the center of the polished floor, wearing an inviting smile that somehow never reached his eyes. He lifted a crystal glass. "Tonight is a celebration of unity, honor, and unforgettable memories," he declared warmly. "And every gathering deserves someone truly memorable." Laughter flickered through the room before quickly fading into carefully composed smiles. Emma looked around, wondering if another distinguished guest had entered behind her. Instead, the man's gaze landed directly on her. "Miss Emma Carter," he continued, extending one arm toward the lonely table beside the pillar. "Would you honor us by joining everyone at the center of the ballroom?" Hundreds of eyes followed his gesture. Emma hesitated only for a moment before rising to her feet. She reminded herself that she had been invited. Perhaps this was simply a formal introduction. She walked slowly across the gleaming floor, aware of every quiet whisper surrounding her. The music softened until only her footsteps echoed beneath the chandeliers. When she reached the center, the master of ceremonies welcomed her with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Everyone has heard remarkable stories about your resilience," he said. "Please tell us how it feels to attend such an elegant celebration after spending so many years away from noble society." The question sounded polite, yet the expressions surrounding her revealed another purpose entirely. Emma folded her hands calmly. "I am grateful to be here," she answered with quiet sincerity. "It is a beautiful evening, and I appreciate the invitation." A young alpha near the front chuckled. "That is all?" he asked. "Surely you expected something more exciting after being forgotten for so long?" More laughter spread through the crowd. Lady Victoria stepped forward gracefully, her sparkling gown catching the light with every movement. "Oh, do not be shy," she said sweetly. "We were all curious whether a rejected Omega still dreams of becoming someone important." Several guests smiled behind their glasses. Others exchanged amused glances without speaking. Emma felt warmth rise into her cheeks, but she kept her shoulders straight. "Dreams belong to everyone," she replied softly. "They do not depend on rank." The answer silenced a few listeners, but Victoria laughed as though Emma had delivered the evening's greatest joke. "Such confidence," she said. "Perhaps confidence deserves applause." A slow, mocking clap began from one side of the ballroom before others reluctantly joined. The sound echoed through the hall with hollow politeness that carried no kindness at all. One servant hurried past carrying a silver tray of sparkling cider. As he approached the gathering, another noble guest carelessly stepped into his path. The startled servant stumbled, and the tray tilted. A glass slipped free, sending a splash of pale cider across the front of Emma's carefully repaired blue dress. The room froze for a heartbeat before scattered laughter returned, louder than before. The servant immediately lowered his head. "I am so sorry, Miss Carter," he whispered, clearly distressed. Emma looked at the spreading stain across the fabric she had spent hours repairing. She could have blamed the frightened servant. She could have added one more voice to the noise surrounding her. Instead, she offered him a gentle smile. "It was an accident," she said quietly. "Please do not worry." Her calm response confused several people who had expected tears or anger. Even Victoria's smile faded for the briefest moment. Yet the whispers continued, circling the ballroom like a cold wind. Emma stood alone beneath the brilliant chandeliers, her dress stained, her dignity tested, and her heart quietly reminding her that kindness often felt the loneliest when the entire room was waiting for it to disappear. The laughter gradually dissolved into scattered conversations, as though nothing unusual had happened. But Emma could still feel countless eyes lingering on her back while she quietly stepped away from the center of the ballroom. She found a small side corridor leading toward an open terrace where the cool evening air carried the scent of pine and moonflowers. The silence outside wrapped gently around her, allowing her racing heart to slow for the first time since she had arrived. She removed a folded handkerchief from her small purse and carefully dabbed at the stain across her blue dress. It would never disappear completely, but she continued anyway, smiling faintly at the thought that her mother would have insisted on trying. "A dress can always be repaired," she remembered her mother saying years ago. "Never let bitterness become the stain that stays forever." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, holding those words close. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened again. Two servants hurried into the corridor carrying fresh table linens. One of them, an elderly man whose silver hair had begun to thin with age, struggled beneath the weight of a large serving tray stacked with polished dishes. His breathing grew uneven as he attempted to keep pace with the younger servant disappearing farther ahead. Before Emma could call out, the older man's foot caught the edge of a decorative carpet. The heavy tray slipped from his trembling hands. Plates slid across the polished floor with sharp clattering sounds, while silver utensils scattered in every direction. The elderly servant lowered his head immediately, his shoulders trembling with quiet panic. "Please forgive me," he whispered to no one in particular. "I will clean everything before anyone notices." Emma did not hesitate. She knelt beside him without the slightest concern for the damp fabric of her own dress. Together, they carefully gathered each unbroken plate while she reassured him with a calm voice. "You are not alone," she said gently. "We can finish this together." The old servant looked at her with surprised eyes. "Miss, after the way they treated you, you should not be helping someone like me." Emma offered the same warm smile that had comforted frightened strangers throughout her life. "Kindness is not something I save for easier days," she replied. "It matters most on the difficult ones." The man's eyes glistened with gratitude as they finished arranging the dishes back onto the tray. Before lifting it again, He reached into his pocket and removed a neatly folded white cloth embroidered with a silver wolf crest. "Please accept this," he said quietly. "It belonged to my late wife. She always believed that gentle hearts were never forgotten." Emma accepted it respectfully, touched more by his sincerity than by the beautiful stitching. She thanked him and carefully folded the cloth into her purse. Neither of them noticed the tall gentleman standing silently beyond the carved stone archway overlooking the terrace. Dressed in the plain dark clothing of a senior palace steward, he had witnessed every moment without interrupting. His posture remained perfectly still, but his observant gray eyes never left Emma as she helped the elderly servant carry the restored tray back toward the ballroom. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face before disappearing just as quickly. Around him, two discreet royal guards waited in the shadows, neither daring to speak. The quiet observer simply turned his gaze back toward the brightly lit ballroom where laughter continued to echo, as though he had just found the one person he had been searching for all evening. Emma followed the elderly servant back toward the ballroom entrance, making certain he no longer struggled beneath the weight of the restored tray. He thanked her once more with a grateful smile before disappearing through a side door reserved for the palace staff. She watched him go, quietly relieved that he would not have to face another moment of embarrassment alone. Then she took a slow breath, straightened the folds of her repaired blue dress as best she could, and returned to the celebration. The grand hall looked unchanged, yet something subtle had shifted. Conversations were calmer, servants moved with greater precision. Several palace guards had quietly taken new positions near the marble columns, their polished uniforms catching the glow of the chandeliers. Emma assumed another distinguished guest must be expected. She slipped back to her lonely table without drawing attention to herself, grateful simply to disappear into the background once again. Across the ballroom, Lady Victoria Hawthorne noticed Emma's return and exchanged an impatient glance with several companions. "She still looks hopeful," one young noble whispered with a smirk. Victoria swirled the sparkling cider in her crystal glass. "Hope can be remarkably stubborn," she replied. "Fortunately, reality usually arrives before the evening ends." They laughed softly, unaware that another pair of eyes had already measured every word. Hidden behind the ordinary appearance of a senior palace steward, the tall observer continued walking through the ballroom at an unhurried pace. Guests greeted him politely without recognizing the authority concealed beneath the plain dark coat. He paused beside musicians, exchanged a few quiet words with palace staff, and observed every expression that crossed the faces of the noble families. Nothing escaped his attention. He had seen Emma comfort the frightened servant. He had watched her forgive an accident that others had hoped would humiliate her. More importantly, he had witnessed the reactions of everyone else. The elderly servant whom Emma had helped approached him discreetly and bowed his head. "Your Majesty," he whispered so quietly that no one nearby could hear. "She never hesitated." The disguised man gave the smallest nod. "I know," he answered. "I saw everything." The servant stepped away without another word. Moments later, the orchestra gradually lowered its music until the final note faded into complete silence. Every conversation stopped. A captain of the royal guard entered through the enormous front doors and struck the marble floor once with the end of his ceremonial staff. The sharp sound echoed throughout the hall. Every noble guest immediately rose to their feet. Emma looked around in confusion, following everyone else's example without understanding why such sudden formality had overtaken the evening. The captain spoke with calm authority. "Prepare yourselves," he announced. "His Majesty is about to enter the Grand Moon Hall." A wave of surprise swept through the ballroom. Even Lady Victoria's confident smile faltered. She leaned toward her father. "No one said the Alpha King would attend tonight," she whispered. Her father looked equally unsettled. "Because he was not supposed to," he replied under his breath. Emma felt her pulse quicken. She had never seen the Alpha King, only heard stories of the quiet ruler whose wisdom had united rival packs across the northern territories. She lowered her eyes respectfully as every noble turned toward the towering entrance. The massive doors slowly opened once again. Moonlight streamed across the polished marble floor as steady footsteps echoed through the silent hall. No one realized that the king they were waiting to welcome had already spent the entire evening among them, quietly watching, listening, and discovering exactly who each person truly was. The silence inside the Grand Moon Hall became so complete that even the gentle crackle of the fireplace seemed impossibly loud. Every noble lowered their head as a tall figure crossed the marble floor with calm, measured steps. His dark ceremonial coat was now replaced by the royal attire of the northern clans, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like moonbeams across fresh snow. A finely crafted crown rested upon his head, simple yet unmistakable. Alpha King Lucian Ashford had arrived, although only a handful of people realized that he had never truly left. Emma lowered her eyes with everyone else, unaware that the quiet palace steward she had seen only moments before no longer existed. She could sense the respect filling the room, but she did not understand the uneasy fear that had suddenly replaced every smile. Lucian acknowledged the formal bows with a slight nod before walking to the center of the ballroom. His expression remained composed, neither warm nor cold. Yet his steady gray eyes carried a quiet authority that required no raised voice. "Please," he said calmly, "you may stand." Chairs shifted softly as the guests obeyed. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt the silence. Lucien allowed his gaze to travel slowly across the ballroom, recognizing every face he had quietly observed throughout the evening. His attention lingered on Lady Victoria Hawthorne for only a brief moment before moving on. He noticed the polished tables, the musicians, the crystal chandeliers, and finally the lonely corner where Emma sat with the faint stain still visible across her carefully repaired blue dress. His eyes rested there for a heartbeat longer before returning to the assembled guests. "I have always believed," Lucien began, "that the strength of a kingdom is measured not by the power of its rulers, but by the character of its people when they believe no one important is watching." Several nobles exchanged uncertain glances. The words sounded simple, yet they carried unexpected weight. Lucien continued walking slowly through the hall. "This evening I wish to observe our traditions without ceremony. I wish to see genuine kindness rather than carefully rehearsed respect." A nervous stillness settled over the crowd. Lady Victoria's father quietly lowered his gaze. The elderly servant whom Emma had helped stood near the back of the ballroom, his hands folded respectfully as he listened. Lucien stopped beside him. "This loyal servant has served the royal household for more than 30 years, the king said. "His devotion has never depended upon applause." The old man bowed deeply, visibly humbled. Lucien then looked toward Emma once more. "Yet tonight," he continued, "when he needed assistance, only one guest offered it without hesitation." A murmur swept through the ballroom before fading almost immediately. Emma looked around, wondering whom the king was describing. She never imagined he could be speaking about her. Lucien took another slow step forward. The person who showed compassion did so after enduring embarrassment, whispered judgment, and unnecessary ridicule. Even then, she chose mercy over resentment. Every word seemed to remove another layer of confidence from those who had laughed earlier. Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken as realization spread across her face. She remembered every mocking smile, every whispered remark, every carefully arranged moment of humiliation. None of it had escaped the king's notice. Emma finally looked up, meeting Lucien's calm eyes for the first time that evening. There was no pity in his expression, only quiet recognition, as though he had already discovered something about her that no one else in the room had ever cared enough to see. The weight of the silence became almost unbearable as Alpha King Lucian Ashford left the center of the ballroom and began walking toward the small table beside the marble pillar. Every measured step echoed across the polished floor, drawing the attention of every noble in the hall. Emma remained perfectly still, uncertain whether she should stand again or remain seated. Before she could decide, Lucian stopped only a few feet away and regarded her with the same composed expression he had carried throughout the evening. "Miss Emma Carter," he said, his voice calm enough to quiet even the faintest whisper. "Would you please join me?" Emma slowly rose to her feet. Her heart raced, but she refused to let fear guide her movements. She stepped forward with quiet dignity until she stood before the king. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Lucian noticed the faint stain that still marked the front of her carefully repaired blue dress. He recognized the delicate stitches where worn fabric had been lovingly restored by patient hands. Then, without the slightest hesitation, he unclasped the long royal cloak resting across his shoulders. The silver-embroidered fabric shimmered beneath the chandeliers as he gently placed it around Emma's shoulders. A quiet gasp spread through the ballroom. No one could remember the last time the royal cloak had been offered to anyone outside the royal family. Emma instinctively reached toward the fabric, surprised by its unexpected warmth. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "this belongs to you." Lucian offered a faint smile. "Tonight," he replied, "it belongs exactly where it should." The hall fell completely silent. Lady Victoria stared in disbelief, her confident posture beginning to crumble beneath the realization of what everyone was witnessing. Lucian slowly turned away from Emma and faced the assembled nobles. His expression remained calm. Yet there was now unmistakable firmness in his voice. "This evening, I witnessed remarkable elegance," he began. "Magnificent decorations, exceptional music, impressive displays of wealth." He allowed his words to settle before continuing. "Unfortunately, I also witnessed something far less worthy of this kingdom." No one dared move. Lucian looked across the gathered guests, one face at a time. I observed polite smiles hiding unkind intentions. I heard laughter directed toward someone who had offered no offense. I watched respected families remain silent while another guest was intentionally made to feel unwelcome. Several nobles lowered their eyes, others shifted uncomfortably without speaking. Lucien's voice never rose. "Respect is not measured by the titles we inherit. It is measured by the kindness we extend to those who possess nothing that can benefit us." His gaze rested briefly on Lady Victoria before continuing across the room. "A kingdom that forgets this lesson weakens itself long before any enemy arrives." Victoria finally stepped forward, struggling to steady her voice. "Your Majesty, we never intended—" Lucian raised one hand gently, stopping her before she could continue. "Intentions are revealed through actions," he said, "and actions always leave witnesses." His words carried no anger, only undeniable truth. He then turned back toward Emma. "Miss Carter arrived this evening with grace, answered ridicule with dignity, forgave an accident without complaint, and offered compassion to someone who believed he had been forgotten. Those choices required far greater strength than mockery ever will." Emma lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the attention she had spent her life trying to avoid. Around the ballroom, the same guests who had laughed only an hour earlier could no longer meet her gaze. For the first time that evening, the room no longer saw a rejected Omega standing alone. They saw the one person the Alpha King himself had chosen to honor before them all. Emma stood quietly beneath the weight of the royal cloak, still struggling to understand why the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom had chosen to defend her before an entire hall filled with nobles. The silver embroidery rested across her shoulders like moonlight woven into fabric, carrying a warmth that seemed strangely comforting despite the cool evening air drifting through the open windows. She lowered her gaze, hoping the attention would soon pass, but Lucian did not move away. Instead, he studied her with calm curiosity, as though every small choice she had made throughout the evening had answered a question he had carried for years. Neither of them noticed the faint shimmer that began to spread across the silver wolf crest embroidered near the clasp of the royal cloak. At first, it looked like nothing more than light reflecting from the crystal chandeliers. Then the glow slowly deepened into a soft silver radiance. A quiet murmur passed through the ballroom. Several elders exchanged startled glances. Emma looked down in confusion as delicate threads of light drifted across the fabric before gently circling her wrist like tiny ribbons of moonlight. They vanished almost as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only a gentle warmth. Lucian's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened with unmistakable recognition. He reached into the inner pocket of his ceremonial coat and removed a small silver medallion engraved with the ancient crest of the Moon Council. As he held it between them, the metal responded with the same quiet glow before becoming still once more. The elderly servant Emma had helped earlier stepped forward with visible surprise. His eyes widened as he looked from the medallion to the royal cloak. "Your Majesty," he whispered carefully, "the old record spoke of this." One of the gray-haired council elders slowly nodded. "The ancient blessing has not revealed itself in generations," he said softly. "It awakens only in the presence of a heart that chooses compassion when pride would be easier." The ballroom became perfectly silent again. No one dared interrupt. Emma looked from one face to another, uncertain why everyone suddenly seemed so astonished. "I do not understand," she admitted quietly. Lucien answered with the same calm voice that had guided the evening from the moment he revealed himself. "Neither titles nor wealth awakened the blessing," he said. "It answered kindness freely given when no reward was expected." Emma gently touched the edge of the cloak, still unable to believe that something so extraordinary could have anything to do with her. "I only helped someone who needed help," she replied. "Anyone should have done the same." Those simple words carried through the hall with greater force than any speech. Several guests lowered their heads, realizing that the lesson they had ignored had been spoken by the very woman they had dismissed. Lucien allowed himself the faintest smile. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly why so few people would have done it." Lady Victoria felt the confidence leave her completely. The evening she had carefully planned to expose weakness had instead revealed the emptiness of her own pride. Around her, other noble families stood in thoughtful silence, no longer concerned with appearances, but with the uncomfortable truth now resting before them. Emma remained exactly as she had been when she first entered the palace, humble, gentle, and sincere. The only thing that had changed was that everyone else could finally see it. And beneath the quiet glow of the ancient blessing, the Alpha King understood that destiny had not revealed greatness through power, but through the quiet strength of a woman who had never allowed cruelty to change the goodness in her heart. The ballroom remained perfectly still, as though time itself had paused to remember the lesson unfolding beneath the crystal chandeliers. No music played, no whispered conversations lingered in the corners. Every noble stood quietly, watching the rejected Omega they had dismissed only hours before. Emma felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, yet she did not lift her chin in triumph or seek satisfaction in their silence. She simply held the royal cloak a little closer around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth but even more grateful that the evening had reminded her kindness was never wasted, even when it seemed unseen. Alpha King Lucien Ashford stepped beside her and faced the gathered families once more. "Tonight," he said with calm authority, "every person in this hall has witnessed a truth that should never have been forgotten. Character cannot be inherited. It cannot be purchased. It is revealed through ordinary choices made when no reward is expected." His words settled over the room with quiet certainty. No one attempted to argue. The elderly council elders slowly stepped forward and bowed respectfully toward Emma. One by one, other members of the Moon Council followed his example. The motion spread across the ballroom like a gentle wave. Noble families who had proudly held their heads high throughout the evening now lowered them with genuine humility. Lady Victoria Hawthorne stood frozen for a long moment before finally taking several careful steps toward Emma. Her confident smile had disappeared, replaced by quiet regret. "Miss Carter," she said softly, her voice no longer carrying even a trace of pride. "I cannot change what happened tonight, but I sincerely ask for your forgiveness." Emma studied her for a moment before offering the same gentle expression that had comforted strangers throughout her life. "I hope we both leave tonight wiser than when we arrived," she answered. "That is enough for me." Victoria lowered her head once more, understanding that forgiveness carried far greater strength than humiliation ever could. Lucian looked toward Emma with quiet admiration. She had been given every reason to answer bitterness with bitterness, yet she had refused to surrender the kindness that defined her. He extended his hand with respectful courtesy rather than command. Emma accepted it with a grateful smile, and together they walked across the marble floor toward the great entrance of the hall. As the towering doors opened, cool night air drifted inside beneath the glow of a brilliant full moon. The royal guards respectfully stepped aside, while every guest remained standing in complete silence. Then, almost naturally, the first noble bowed. Another followed, then another. Then in the grand moon hall lowered their head as Emma and the Alpha King passed before them, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect had finally found the person who truly deserved it. Outside, the palace gardens shimmered beneath silver moonlight as Lucian paused beside the wide stone steps overlooking the quiet valley below. "The kingdom has spent too many years judging hearts by titles," he said gently. "Perhaps tonight is the beginning of something better." Emma looked toward the peaceful horizon, where the first light of a new dawn hinted beyond the distant mountains. She smiled, not because her life had changed in a single evening, but because she finally understood that compassion had never made her weak. It had quietly guided her to the place where destiny had been waiting all along, proving that true strength is always gentle, and that the brightest future often begins after the darkest misunderstanding has finally come to an end.